In our previous module, we meticulously translated clinical reports into a standardized set of injuries in Section 6. We now arrive at the final data entry section of the MTR form, where we will document the conclusion of the patient's hospital journey. Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 7, which covers Section 7, Outcome. Let us begin by reviewing our learning objectives for this module. Upon completion of this session, you will be able to: first, identify the correct source documents for outcome data, which are primarily the discharge summary and the inpatient notes. Second, define the principles of data quality as they apply to documenting the final clinical status and disposition of the patient. Third, you will be able to accurately enter all data within Section 7, including the levels of care, survival status, functional outcome scores, and discharge details. Fourth, you will learn to correlate the data in this section to the outcome component of the Donovan model. And finally, you will be able to justify the need for meticulous accuracy in recording outcomes for the purpose of national benchmarking and quality analysis. Welcome to the training module for Section 7, Outcome. We have now followed the patient through the pre-hospital phase, the emergency department, and their definitive management. This final data entry section is dedicated to closing the loop on the patient's in-hospital journey. Here, we will document the patient's entire pathway through the hospital, any complications that arose during their stay, their final survival status, and their functional condition at the time of discharge. This section provides the ultimate measure of the care that was provided. We will proceed field by field to ensure you can document these critical endpoints with complete accuracy. The outcome section is arguably the most important part of the registry, as it provides the data against which all other data is measured. The information you enter here is essential for three primary reasons. First, for measuring performance. The survival status is the primary outcome we use to benchmark our hospital's performance against national standards. This is the ultimate denominator of the quality of care. Second, for assessing quality of life. Functional outcome scores, like the Glasgow Outcome Scale or GOS, help us understand the long-term impact of injuries and the effectiveness of our care in preserving a patient's independence and quality of life. And third, for completing the audit loop. In the Donovan model, this section represents the outcome. By comparing the actual outcome to the predicted outcome, which was calculated from previous sections, we can identify areas of excellence and opportunities for improvement. This is the core function of a clinical quality registry. Now, let's walk through each field in Section 7. We will now begin our detailed guide for Section 7, Outcome, starting with the very first field, level of care involved during in-hospital care. This field is designed to create a comprehensive map of the patient's entire journey after they have left the emergency department and are admitted to the hospital. Your instruction for this field is to treat it as a multi-select checklist. You must review the patient's complete inpatient record and check all the boxes that apply to the different units or departments the patient received care in. For example, a common pathway for a severe trauma patient might be from the emergency department to the operating theater, then to the critical or intensive care unit, and finally to a general ward before discharge. In this case, you would need to check all four boxes. It is critical to note that if you select critical/intensive care unit, a new set of mandatory fields will appear. You must then enter the specific ICU admission date and time, and the total length of stay in the ICU. Your source documents for this information will be the patient's complete electronic health record, their inpatient progress notes, nursing flowcharts, and the final discharge summary. The pearl, or best practice here, is to understand that you are mapping the patient's complete in-hospital journey. A thorough review of the entire record is necessary to ensure every level of care is captured. This provides a clear and invaluable picture of the patient's pathway and the hospital resources that were utilized. The most common and significant pitfall to avoid is only selecting the final ward the patient was discharged from. A trauma patient's journey is often complex, and missing any of the intermediate steps, like the operating theater or the ICU, results in an incomplete and inaccurate record, which fundamentally compromises our ability to analyze the process of care. Following our discussion on the various levels of care, we will now focus on a specific, high-level intervention that is a key indicator of a patient's severity. Field number 2. Patient requires endotracheal intubation. This field is designed to capture whether the patient needed advanced airway support in the form of mechanical ventilation at any point during their in-hospital stay. Your instruction is to select yes or no based on the clinical record. If you select yes, it is mandatory that you then document the date and time of the initial intubation, and, critically, the number of total days on ventilator. The source documents for this information will be the intensive care unit or ICU flowcharts, ventilator sheets, anesthesia records, and the daily physician progress notes. The pearl, or best practice, here is to understand the importance of the number of total days on ventilator. This is a key metric for measuring both the severity of the patient's condition and the hospital resources utilized. The standard protocol for calculation, which you must follow for consistency, is that any partial day on a ventilator counts as one full day. For example, a patient who was ventilated for 30 hours would be recorded as 2 days. The most critical pitfall to avoid is documenting a pre-hospital intubation in this field. If the patient arrived at the hospital already intubated, that information is documented in Section 3, out of hospital care. This field is exclusively for intubations that occur after the patient has been admitted to the hospital. By accurately capturing this data, you provide a clear measure of patient acuity and the intensity of care required, which is fundamental for our registry's analysis. Following the patient's in-hospital pathway, we now turn to a critical field for monitoring patient safety. Field number 3, events during hospital stay. This field is designed to capture any significant complications or adverse events that the patient developed after they were admitted to the hospital. Your instruction is to treat this as a multi-select checklist. You must conduct a thorough review of the entire inpatient record, including the progress notes, nursing records, and the final discharge summary, and check all the boxes that apply to any documented hospital-acquired complications. Please note that if you select others, it is mandatory that you specify the complication in the text box provided. The pearl, or best practice for this section, is to understand that you are tracking critical patient safety indicators. The data you enter here is essential for our hospital's quality improvement programs. It allows us to identify and address patterns of preventable harm, such as hospital-acquired infections or pressure ulcers. The most significant and common pitfall to avoid is checking a box for a condition that was a direct result of the initial trauma. This section is exclusively for complications that arose during the hospital stay. Let me provide a clear example. A traumatic brain injury sustained in a car crash is the primary injury and would be documented in Section 6. However, if that patient later develops a stroke or CVA, or a ventilator-associated pneumonia while in the ICU, those are hospital-acquired complications and must be checked here. Making this distinction is fundamental to the integrity of our data. We now arrive at what is arguably the most important single data point in the entire Malaysian Trauma Registry, field number 4, survival status on discharge. This field serves as the primary outcome measure for the patient's entire journey. Your instruction here is to select the single option, either alive or dead, that reflects the patient's status at the time of their final discharge from the hospital. It is critical to note that if you select dead, the subsequent field, cause of death, becomes mandatory. You must then transcribe the cause of death as documented in the official record. The source document for this information will be the official hospital discharge summary, the final physician's progress note, or the official death certificate. The pearl, or best practice for this field, is to understand its profound significance. This single data point is the primary outcome measure for the entire trauma registry. In the context of the Donabedian model, this is the ultimate outcome against which all the structures and processes we have documented are measured. The accuracy of this one field is paramount. The most critical pitfall to avoid is selecting unknown unless it is truly and exceptionally impossible to determine the patient's status from the record. The final disposition should always be known. A second critical error is selecting dead, but then failing to complete the mandatory cause of death field. A record of death without the cause is incomplete data and will be flagged in our quality audits. By accurately capturing this definitive outcome, you are providing the most crucial piece of data for benchmarking our performance and fulfilling the core mission of the registry. Having established the patient's fundamental survival status in the previous field, we now move to quantify the quality of that survival. This is documented in fields 5 and 6, the Glasgow Outcome Scale (GOS), and the Modified Rankin Scale (MISS). These two scales are standardized tools used worldwide to measure a patient's functional and neurological condition after a significant event like a major trauma. Your instruction is to select a single category for both the GOS and the MRS that best describes the patient's condition at the time of their hospital discharge. The source for this information will be the final physician's assessment in the discharge summary, and you may also find valuable details in the notes from physiotherapy or occupational therapy. Let's briefly clarify the key choices. The Glasgow Outcome Scale provides a broad overview. Good recovery implies the patient can live independently. Moderate disability means they are disabled but can still care for themselves. Severe disability, however, means they are conscious but now dependent on others for their daily needs. The Modified Rankin Scale is a more granular 0 to 6 scale, where a lower score is better. A score of 0 or 1 indicates no significant disability, while a score of 4 or 5 indicates severe disability requiring assistance. The pearl, or best practice here, is to understand that these scales measure the quality of survival. They provide crucial context to the alive or dead status by describing the patient's level of independence, which is a core outcome measure for the registry. The most critical pitfall to avoid is guessing the score. If the discharge summary is unclear about the patient's functional dependency, for example, it doesn't state whether they can walk or care for themselves, you must select unknown. An inaccurate functional score is worse for our data quality than no score at all. By accurately capturing this information, you are helping us understand the true human impact of trauma and the effectiveness of our care in restoring patients to their lives. Having documented the patient's clinical and functional condition at the end of their stay, we will now record the administrative details of their departure. This is covered in fields 7, 8, and 9, discharge date, length of stay, and destination. Your first instruction for field number 7 is to enter the final hospital discharge date and time. This is the official moment the patient was discharged from the hospital's care. Next, for field number 8, length of stay, you are not required to enter any data. This value will be automatically calculated by the system, based on the admission date and the discharge date you have entered. Finally, for field number 9, you will select the patient's final discharge destination from the list provided. The source for this information will be the hospital's administrative or clerical system, or the official discharge summary. Let's briefly clarify the key destination choices. Home and rehabilitation are self-explanatory. Morgue should be selected if the patient died. The options for another CCU distinguish between a transfer for a higher level of care versus a transfer to a similar facility, perhaps one closer to the patient's home. The pearl, or best practice here, is that if you select other for the discharge destination, you must specify the location in the text box. This is crucial for capturing data on post-hospital care needs, such as transfers to hospice or nursing home facilities. The most critical pitfall to avoid is an incorrect discharge date. This may seem like a simple administrative detail, but it is a critical error that completely invalidates all length of stay calculations for the patient. You must always verify this against the official hospital administrative system record. By accurately closing the record with these details, you complete the patient's story and ensure our system-level data is robust and reliable. We now come to the final check of the patient's status. For fields 10 and 11, the major trauma criteria, inclusion and exclusion, your instruction is to perform a final check to confirm if the patient meets the official definition of major trauma. You will review the patient's entire journey and check all criteria that apply, based on the data you have already entered in the previous sections. The source document for this is, in fact, the data from all previous sections of the MTR form itself. The pearl here is to treat this as a summary checklist that validates your previous entries. For example, if the patient died, you must check all deaths after injury. If their ISS score from section 6 was 15, you must check ISS greater than 12. The pitfall to avoid is not completing this section. The system uses these criteria to filter cases for national-level analysis. An incomplete checklist can cause a major trauma case to be erroneously excluded from important quality reports. Let us now summarize the key takeaways from this module. First, Section 7 documents the final outcome of care, which is the ultimate measure in the Donabedian model. Second, your primary source documents are the discharge summary and the complete inpatient medical record. Third, the survival status and the Glasgow Outcome Scale are the most critical data points for measuring the success of our care. And finally, the major trauma criteria checklist is a vital step to ensure the integrity of the data for national reporting. This concludes the training for Section 7, Outcome. You now understand how to document the final and most impactful chapter of the patient's in-hospital journey. The data you enter in this section allows us to close the audit loop and measure our performance. Your meticulous attention to detail here ensures that our analysis is meaningful, our benchmarking is fair, and our mission to improve trauma care for all Malaysians is built on a foundation of high-quality evidence. In our final module, we will cover Section 8, Submission Validation. Thank you.